Welcome to Bridgewalkers Tea. Grab your tea, pull up a chair, and join us in these conversations around practical spirituality, systemic change, and solopreneurship. I'm Manasi Kakade, a practical spirituality mentor and speaker for Bridgewalkers.
I'm Rose Pudzis, a storyteller and a professional talker.
A Bridgewalker is an analytical, critical thinker fascinated by spirituality.
According to Human Design, both of us are generators or alchemists with open throat center. What that means is that we love talking. And when we talk from a balanced place, our words, our expression, and our ideas bring learning and healing. We would love for you to join the conversation too. So don't hesitate to submit your comments or questions via the form. And the link is in the description. So if you're having fun and you're enjoying this experience, please take some time to review us and subscribe. That will help us reach more Bridgewalkers.
We hope that these candid, unfiltered conversations bring you new perspectives, spark an inspiration, and give you the confidence to shine in your own unique way of being, called dharma in Sanskrit. Because it's through your dharma that you are going to contribute to building new social systems and structures rooted in love, equality for all souls, and equity for the marginalized. And that's what being a Bridgewalker is all about. Are you ready? Let's begin. Hello, Bridgewalkers. Welcome to Bridgewalkers Tea. Do I have a treat for you today? I have invited a special guest to join me in this conversation today, and that guest is Dr. Michael Lennox. You have heard me speak about Dr. Lennox. You have heard me mention that that's my go-to astrologer when it comes to understanding universal energy and how it's reflected in astrology, understanding what different planets represent. I learned from him. I have taken his classes, and I have been following him for since 2018 or so, I think. So for about 4 years now. And it's absolutely a treat every time you get to hear him break down astrology and explain the human experience through astrology. Today, I invited him here to especially talk about the Pluto return of the United States. And he will dive into what that means in the first place, and then all these movements of systemic change that we are experiencing, this momentum that is building around systemic change, how is this reflected in astrology? It is reflected, especially in the US, through the Pluto return of the United States. And that's what he's covering for us today. So before we jump into the conversation, let me formally introduce Dr. Michael Lennox to you so that you recognize why he is the expert to talk about this issue. Dr. Michael Lennox is a psychologist, astrologer, and dream expert. He has been helping people have deeper understanding of their unconscious mind for almost 25 years. In workshops, in media, for private clientele, and on the internet via his popular website, drmichaellennox.com, Dr. Lennox guides people through life's mysteries with deep and profound wisdom delivered through a humorous, extemporaneous, and animated style that has now become his trademark. He is your ambassador for Conscious Embodiment. His Red Robe Astrology reports, which many of our listeners know him from, they are available on Instagram, Facebook, and also TikTok. And they are growing in popularity with every passing month, reaching thousands of people every day. A highly sought after media expert, Dr. Lennox has been seen internationally on many television shows, beginning with the sci-fi networks The Dream Team with Annabelle and Michael in January 2003. His radio and podcast appearances talking about the power of dreams and the impact of astrology now number in hundreds. Dr. Lennox obtained his master's and doctorate degree in psychology from the Chicago School, Astrology and Personality, which is his doctoral dissertation, it is published by Lambert Academic Publishing out of Germany. Lennox has authored 3 books on dreams. Dream Sight, a dictionary and guide for interpreting any dream, was published by Llewellyn Worldwide Press in 2011, and it's now available in 5 languages. He has 2 other books that were published in 2015 and 2017, Llewellyn's Complete Dream Dictionary and The Little Book of Dreams. Dr. Michael Lennox leads classes, workshops, and retreats all over the United States and conducts a worldwide private practice based in Southern California. He is followed by thousands of people on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. He offers them daily guidance enthusiastically via his Red Robe Astrology Alert. And he also has a podcast called Conscious Embodiment with Dr. Michael Lennox, where he offers weekly astrological weather every Monday and also takes questions from listeners around how to interpret the dreams. This podcast is for those who are piecing together life's mysteries 1 week at a time. So please welcome with me my go-to astrologer for Western astrology, Dr. Michael Lennox. Welcome, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm so excited to have you. I have been looking forward to this since we decided in January that we have been talking about this.
I'm so glad. I've actually been excited too, because this particular topic in astrology, the Pluto return of the United States, is very interesting to me.
Right. And you have been talking about that. It's not like you are just talking about it. You have been talking about it, addressing it. So let's jump right into it.
Yeah.
Before we go there, though, I absolutely love the prayers that you invoke your classes with.
You want me to pray in? I'll pray.
Let's do that.
I love it.
Do that. Let's set up the energy.
In my medicine circles, they joke about it. They're like, let's put a quarter into Lennox and he'll deliver you a prayer.
Let's do that then.
Let's do that. So we put a hand on our heart and one on our breath. We take a breath of gratitude, calibrating the moment and declaring that the sacred space has opened up and we are in it. How grateful I am to sit in this beautiful chair of facilitation and leadership and teaching, where I place my small ways aside, trusting that the great ways speak with me and through me and as me, with grace and ease and power and clarity, recognizing too that the receptivity of everyone who taps into this sacred conversation, no matter when they listen in, are part of this consciousness that we are building, where we seek to explore and dive into the depth of these experiences that we wish to understand with a greater open heart and a congruent mind. And we allow the healing and the teaching to marinate over us as we come together for the sacred conversation. We allow this conversation to open up our hearts and minds to a greater level, and then we share the blessing and the benefit with everyone we come in contact with, for truly we are one with all. And so it is. Amen.
Namaste.
Namaste. Oh, that put me in a state too. Yeah. So let's start technically, right? Like, we can't talk about the Pluto return unless you know what a Pluto return is. And so let's just start with what a returning planet is. Every planet will return to its original place based on a chart that's set to represent a certain consciousness. Everybody knows what this is, because once a year you celebrate your solar consciousness, and the sun represents the center of us, the personality of us. And when that sun returns to where it was when you were born, that's a solar return, and the consciousness of the self gets risen up. You call that your birthday. Mm-hmm. But in astrology, it's the solar return, the return of the sun back to its originating point for your birth chart. Every planet will return to the originating place based on its orbital cycle. Certainly, if any of your listeners have a little bit of, extra knowledge of astrology, that you may have heard of the Saturn return, which is a huge moment that happens to everybody at around 28, 29, 30, and then around 58, 59, 60, because Saturn has a 30-year orbit. And when that planet returns, the individual is faced with all the life lessons, because Saturn is the teacher, that is needed to cross the threshold of that returning moment, right? So the first time, it's like we're turning 30, which we know colloquially as hard because we're turning 30. From the astrological perspective, what's happening there is that we're facing the lessons we need to learn to become a full-on adult. So Saturn, the teacher, will kick those lessons up in a very big way at that time when he's back where he started. And we, as individuals, when we're in one, experience the lessons we need to learn to successfully navigate the next chapter. I happen to be in my second Saturn return right now, which means I am facing the lessons that I need to learn to become the wisdom giver, the wise dude that I'm becoming. This becomes that year of get those lessons down, Michael, because there's no turning back. The last return that anybody's likely to experience in a lifetime is the Uranus return, which is an 84-year cycle. And that planet is about the waking up to higher levels of consciousness. And that returning cycle is the life cycle. We live to around 84 years these days, if all goes well, later in, as medical treatment, right? And years ago, it was, half that. In fact, I love the fact that my mother passed away right at her Uranus return. It was like such a fun little gift as an astrologer that I watched her chart, the last years of her life and that. So no one's going to live to 300 years old. So none of us are going to have a personal experience of a Pluto return. And the only consciousness that could have such a thing would be an organization, or in this case, a country that is young enough for us to have a real sense of origin moment, but old enough to be like 250 plus years old for Pluto to have completed a single orbit. And that's the United States. Right. We could look at lots of other countries, but those countries have been around for millennia, and who knows what the origin moment of India is, right? It's ancient. It doesn't have a moment, but the United States does. And we call that in astrological communities July 4th, 1776, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I choose 12 p.m. noon as the nadir of the day as the chart that I look at. Some astrologers choose 5 p.m. because there is anecdotal evidence that the document that was signed on July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence, was more attended to later in the day as people made their way over to Constitution Hall and signed the document. So that chart is the working, air quotes, natal chart for the United States of America. And Pluto was at 27 degrees, 33 minutes of Capricorn on July 4th, 1776. And here we are, roughly 250 years later, and starting in February of this year, Pluto is back at 27 degrees, 33 minutes of Capricorn, and we are engaged this year in the Pluto return for the United States. The reason I mentioned birthdays and then Saturn returns was to get your listening audience in the mind of when a planet returns, its consciousness rises up in a humongous way. Hence the sun, birthday. It's all about me today. Or, those people who like celebrate their birthday month. Yeah, I don't do that. I'm an August 23rd dude. It's like we celebrate my birthday on that day. And the Saturn return, all the lessons get kicked up. So a Pluto return rises up for consciousness to be fully aware of what Pluto represents. So first and foremost, Pluto is about power and authority. That's the essence of this planet. As the lord of the underworld and the slowest planet. And for us astrologers, Pluto is still a planet. We don't give a shit about the orbital path crossing Neptune. Just to throw a little nod in here about astronomically. Pluto is a planet if you think shape, but not if you consider location.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Location counts because Pluto doesn't have its own singular orbital path. It crosses over the orbit of Neptune. That makes it not a planet if a planet's definition is its own orbital path with enough gravity to push other planets out of the way. So in that definition, Pluto is not a planet, but the dwarfy icy bodies that are really these transorbital bodies that some astronomers are saying Pluto is, are ignoring the fact that Pluto is round. None of these other bodies are round.
Right. Like you're comparing it to like comet.
That's right. Or a rock.
Right.
A rock that's fully formed as an asteroid might be big enough to be an object we consider, but it exists as it exists. The rock is shaped oddly because that's what it is. A round planet formed from the disk of matter that coalesced around itself into these shapes driven by gravity. Round is a planet. Pluto is round. Pluto is a planet. End of lecture.
And also, I would think that astronomy matters in understanding the planets, but astrologically, we give them consciousness. So whether that's
right, and that's exactly right. That's right. The consciousness of Pluto did not care that his astronomical definition was being futzed with. And the truth is, the scientific community isn't done with this debate. We may not know that, but the actual astronomy community is divided anyway.
Right.
Pluto is a planet. The consciousness of power and authority is in the chart of the United States in a very powerful sign for creating the structures of because Capricorn is the sign that invented structures. And when I say structures, I mean civic structures, governmental structures, geographical structures, infrastructure structures, the idea that we build consciousness that is American is a structural consciousness, and Capricorn is the sign that invented that. So having Pluto in Capricorn was also a consciousness that allowed the United States to become the world power, dominating others, because it had that level of power and authority by virtue of Pluto in the sign of Capricorn. One could also argue that because in the chart of the United States, the Mercury of the country, which is in Cancer, is in opposition to Pluto. Oppositions say there's a kind of tension that develops between polarized notions. Mercury is our voice, our thoughts, our expressions, our words, our dogma, our credo, our messaging. In the sign of Cancer, which is also the sun sign of the United States, We were created as a nurturing place where the disenfranchised could go and would be welcomed in a Cancerian, nurturing, Statue of Liberty in the harbor kind of way. And our voice drives that by being in Cancer. But there's a setup there, which is the opposition. There's a tension between who we say we are and who we really are. And so this is where we then look to Pluto for its shadow perspective of what is hidden. What is in the shadow, meaning hidden and driving us. Shadow isn't just that it's hidden. Shadow in depth psychology says there's something I'm disowning, not, accepting, pushing away, pretending isn't true, or otherwise obfuscating because it's safer to shove stuff under the carpet. And that's a Pluto consciousness. In fact, my joke about Pluto, he's the Lord of the underworld. He's like, I have a huge basement. I can put everything you don't want to look at in my basement. Right? So the fundamental shadow of that particular day, July 4th, 1776, is built right into the language. All men are created equal. In a country where men, white men, ravaged the indigenous cultures that were here before us, killed them off, called it divine intervention and manifest destiny, but a decimation. It's like, look at how clearly the hand of God has laid way for us to come in and thrive. It's like, that wasn't the hand of God. That was you killing off people with guns and smallpox. And then women were, chattel at that point fully.
Right.
But then the greatest sort of lie in that word, in those words of all men are created equal, is perhaps the enslavement of human beings, where Washington, D.C. itself was built by slaves. So we move forward from that moment and everything that the country became. In all of its greatness, in all of its world-centric, powerful, we are at the top of the pyramid of the New World Order, had this fundamental, shadowy truth that's been spouting out all along the way in a manner that, that educated people and forward-thinking progressive people over the centuries have been trying to push a more authentic expression of what the United States could be or should be forward. We are at a moment where we are experiencing what astrology allows for when a planet comes back to where it was. And so the Pluto return now isn't about how great we are and how powerful we are, but about the lies that are perpetrated about what we are and who we are.
Right. And that's one of the pointers that came to me as you were talking about it, is Pluto teaches us, it asks us to explore what is a true sense of power, what is true authority.
Yes.
So United States, based on where it is now in its history, has created this illusion of what it means to be powerful.
That's right.
That has created these wounds that are in the basement.
That's
not
right.
looked at.
Not looked at.
Not
but
looked at.
You cannot not look at something in a return.
Right.
And while the Pluto return is exact this year, Pluto moves so slowly that I would say we've been feeling this since Pluto moved into Capricorn in 2007 and 8. If you remember that set of years, that's when the recession blew the structures of the world up and centered in banking and housing in the United States.
The structures that we didn't even think are capable of falling.
That's right. I love this. Too big to fail. It's
Right.
like, no, kids, too big not to fail. Like that, like that. The hubris of too big to fail is a perfect exemplar of the Pluto return of the United States, because that arrogance and the narcissism of the United States that has built mightily over the last 250 years also put us in this position to not be looking at the underbelly and the suffering and the falseness of these narratives until we got to a point where it became undeniable. So when Pluto and Uranus were conjunct, meaning the planet of change and power and authority, Pluto, was hanging out with the other agent of change, Uranus, that is revolutionary in nature, the lightning flash, anything can happen planet. When those two planets joined together at the exact same place in the cosmos, that was the 1960s, honey. That was the civil rights movement. That was the beginning of the women's movement. That was the beginning of the gay rights movement. There were all of these revolutionary ideas that were entering the zeitgeist in the 60s. And the patriarchy came slamming in at the end of the 60s and shut that shit down with a series of assassinations and a way of intervening from a behind closed doors, white patriarchal part of the government said, we can't have this. And so what you saw at the end of the 60s was a reaction to the revolutionary changes and the seeds that were being planted at that time. And then we moved through the 70s and the 80s, where we went into very different unconscious places. I mean, the 80s were just filled with, abundance and prosperity and ignoring all of the sort of things that really needed our attention. But once we moved into Pluto and Capricorn time with that too big to fail, there was no stopping the momentum from that recession to where we wound up in 2020. And 2020 was, in January of 2020, was the beginning of this crazy period that we're in right now, where if you look back to January 2020, the president of the United States was being impeached. I think Australia was burning off the continent, right? There was a virus rising up out of China, threatening to move around the world. And in fact, it did. What was happening in January of 2020 astrologically was Pluto was getting closer to this Pluto return moment. And he met up with Saturn in Capricorn. Saturn rules Capricorn. So the structure sign had the structure planet, Saturn, meeting up with the death, rebirth, change, transformation, shadow planet, and the world exploded in this crazy manner that led to all sorts of movements that rose up. And the Me Too movement and the civil rights sort of second wave rose up. Black Lives Matter. Suddenly privilege is being talked about everywhere. And the polarization of the United States just rose up like a thing into and of itself.
Right.
Like this crazy divide that we're experiencing comes directly from Pluto looking to have us see down into the basement of our shadow, look at those things that we've never been willing to look at before. Only the stakes are wildly high. Because if we don't do this well, I don't know where we're going. I don't know what's going to happen, right?
Right.
So we moved through the crazy year of the global pandemic and all of the changes in 2020. And then when we got into 2021 last year, this is now when breakdowns really started to happen. The astrological drive of that last year was the planet Saturn, reckoning, lessons, responsibility, karma, squaring, which is conflict geometry, that Uranus, anything can happen, lightning flash planet. And we watched as the election was challenged and, just all of the unstable breakdowns of last year was sort of like the next step. And now we're in the full on Pluto return. The first hit of it was just this past February on the 20th. It was exact. It'll return again, ironically, right at the beginning of July, right near Independence Day. July 11th is the exact date of it. And then December 28th. Pluto moves very slowly. These dates are not to be thought of as significant dates. The whole year is the Pluto return. And so we're in this place right now where we're, at least as astrology describes it, we're at the peak of the experience that says, if we don't look at this and get below it, I'm not going to finish that sentence because I don't know what's going to happen. And I don't want to be too alarmist about what might happen. And the challenges that might come from this if we don't do it well aren't like a 2023 thing. They're the next generation or two. Like, you know what I mean? Like but we're in the full on reckoning of it. The last thing about the chart of the United States that I want to add in is that when I was starting to look at all of this stuff in earnest a couple of years ago and got curious about the Pluto return, I noticed something that I had seen before, but I never clocked it, that the Mars placement for the United States is in the sign of Gemini. Mars rules the body and our physical experience in, say, a natal chart. So I would interpret Mars in a chart for a country to represent the population.
Okay.
And Gemini is the divide, the debate to the two sides. And in its best use of Mars and Gemini would be, we can debate, we can talk about difference, and we can dialogue from different perspectives and maybe get somewhere out of that process. But the shadow of Gemini is polarization. Yeah, we see it all over this country to the point where it's like an illness.
Right.
It's like a mental illness. I feel it. I feel like I'm like worked out and in my center and spiritually driven. And I've been thinking about these things for years. And I will still occasionally watch. I don't step into the news very deeply, just enough to know what's going on, right? But I did glance at a few Republican women speaking about to the the Supreme Court nominee that's being interviewed this year, and I felt murderous rage. I could picture myself with my hands around this woman's neck and, doing her some damage. Now, it didn't last very long, and I don't operate out of that place. But I recognize that it lives in me because I'm a human being. The challenge with most human beings who make up the Mars and Gemini population of the United States is they're not sitting in a consciousness experience of saying, oh, look, I too am that enraged at the polarization. Now, it's just a part of me. It gets triggered in a moment here and a moment there. But most of the population is living in their chosen side of this divide. And it's like a massive mental illness, including this moment where I'm looking at a woman who's a child of God and a human being and has a mother and maybe children and is divine in her own right. And for 2.5 seconds, I can picture myself strangling her. That's how deep this goes. And now multiply that exponentially and add the unconsciousness piece. And you see that we're in some terrible, terrible trouble.
So given that Mercury is in Cancer and so is the sun. So that's our conscious awareness, our thought patterns. They are coming from that emotional nurturing place. That's what the United States is saying who they are. The shadow is not exactly that. Shadow is rooted in like systemic issues that rise from power and authority. And the Mars is making it very easy to keep the population polarized. Unless they're spiritually in tuned.
I want to add to this that the Jupiter and the Venus of the chart of the United States is also in Cancer. That means our abundance, our expansiveness, our aspirational nature really is the nurturer of the world, the mother of the world. Read that poem on the United States, and you see, and not the United States, the poem on the Statue of Liberty.
Statue of Liberty, yeah.
Yes, that poem exemplifies that the United States has Jupiter in Cancer and Venus in Cancer. Send us your disenfranchised and we will kiss their boo-boos. And this, sweetheart, this isn't what the United States thinks it is. This is what the United States is.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So we are. Millions and millions of people have come to the shores of the United States, been taken in and embraced and said, you belong here. You are welcome here.
Right. It is so interesting because I'm an immigrant here. I have looked at United
That's right,
States.
Baby.
So I have looked at United States from being in the United States now for 17 years, but also outside of United States. And I have to say, it's very interesting. And I don't know if it works for the human beings also like that, where the impression, I never really got the impression that the United States is nurturing. I just got the impression that they are the power. So we go there to make better lives, and hopefully they will accept us. Hopefully we wouldn't face too much, but I have faced racism. I have faced xenophobia, sexism, obviously, like anywhere else in the world. But to think that until you mentioned that this is who we are and the shadow is the other way.
Where do you live?
Now in the United States.
Hello. So there you have it. You are welcomed here. You are taken in and given a home. Now, you're absolutely right. The shadow of that is that all of this abundance, prosperity, we will care for you applies if you're white.
Right.
Period. Right? That's the
straight
shadow.
White man.
That's right. If you're a straight white man.
Straight white man.
You benefit. So listen, part of my view of the United States is because I know about my ancestors coming through Ellis Island. I am from that population of people who came in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, in that Cancerian Jupiter, Venus, Cancer, saying, come here, we will take care of you. But what's true about now is you can't unsee what we're now seeing, which is, of course, why the polarization has increased, right? Because that's what people do. Right. But it's the shadow. We can't unsee that we are hip to the egregiousness of the divide and the outrageousness of the racism that's systemic. And so, of course, that polarized white Christian driven sense of, no, that's not true, is rising up everywhere. And the polarization continues. I got to tell you, as a human being in a white man's body, I don't know how to be a force for change in a world where I want the Cancerian notion of the country to be activated fully and really. I know how to help individuals solve the wars in their own hearts. And my belief is, if more people, just as you would know that the more people who are aware of their, white people who are aware of their privilege, help to shift and change the challenges of that white privilege is ruining everything. Right.
And it's not just even being aware of our privileges and healing the wounds of our marginalization. I also believe that our unique way of being, when we heal ourselves to a certain extent, where we start feeling okay to start expressing our dharma, who we are, that expression itself contributes to the healing. Now, you may not go out there and change, like make a policy change, but you are empowering people in order to heal, in order to face their shadows. And that itself is going to contribute to changing the systems in some way.
And that's because my dharma is to teach. It's not to be an activist.
Right. Right.
We need our activists. So
Absolutely.
please, if any of your Bridgewalkers are also got loud voices, have at that. We
Right.
need you.
Right.
You know, I do my work, you know, privately with people. And yes, I've been talking about this for years. I didn't start looking at my white privilege last year or in 2020.
Right.
I started looking at, I was trying to remember what year it was, but I had this experience. It had to have been like 29 or 2010, somewhere around there, 10, 11, because of where I was living, right? I was walking home from a movie, 10 block walk. It was nighttime. And in the course of walking down Beverly Boulevard for these 10 blocks, I had cause to walk by a group of people that were white and a group of people that were black. And because it was night, I was alone. I was in sort of my walking meditative kind of mode. I was very aware of my thoughts and feelings as I was walking past this one group and then this other group. I was so astonished to feel uncomfortable when I passed the group of black people. And it wasn't like I felt good with the white people and bad with the black people. I didn't feel anything with the white people. It was a neutral experience of just walking. And others were walking too. And it was like no thought. But when the group was black, I had thoughts and feelings. Now, they were quiet as all get out. They weren't loud, but they were there. And I was like, wow, I can't dial that back. Like that happened. Part of what I got confronted with then was this notion of, well, I'm not racist. How could I be racist? I'm such a good white person. You know, when I was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, I lived as a minority in a primarily black town where I got beaten up twice for being white. How could I be racist? My mother grew up on the streets of New York City and talked about how she was sort of in love with all of the black kids in her neighborhood because they were so blah, 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 right? So like, how could I be racist? I have all of this, you know, but I'm a white man who has enjoyed a boatload of privilege. And I began to look at moments like that periodically, not in some earnest way. By the time, in fact, it became important to do that on the planet in the last couple of years for anybody was, you know, open their eyes and saw what was going on. I had already done enough to be like, oh, here we are. Look what's happening. Right. And then still, I'm not an activist for this. I'm not going to be running out here, except in moments like this, where on my podcast or on your podcast or on a yearly, you know, webinar where I talk about the astrology coming up, I talk about. So I have talked about it much. But it is about, you know, letting people know that what we're experiencing has energetic context. The astrology isn't making this happen. It's reflecting that it's happening.
Right. And I absolutely love how you present astrology like that, which is what it is. It's the reflection of the universal energy, which is the reflection of our consciousness that we see, or
that's right,
not see, but intellectually know or hopefully experience as oneness.
Yes.
And that's what is being reflected versus astrology is causing something.
Right. Right. Well, I know. No, yeah. And that's where people can't take it on and believe it. It's like, how could that be? It's like, because it's not. That's not how it works.
Right. And that's why I absolutely love your red robe astrology every morning, because it's a reflection that you are verbalizing.
Yeah.
That you have multiple times said you feel through your emotions, your body. So you experience universal energy already.
Yes, I do.
And then reflection, then astrology gives us a tool to express that, which is beautiful.
Thank you.
What I wanted to share here with my audience is also a learning moment that many of you are going to know this, that just because you have Black friends or just because you have a Black husband even, doesn't mean that you are not, and if you're a white person, then doesn't mean you are not experiencing privileges.
That's right.
That just your loved ones are not experiencing.
That's right.
Their experience is different and yours is different. So when we say racism, we are talking about systemic racism, meaning a system that is built on the premise that one person, one type of person is better than the other person. And that differentiation, that one he's better than the other, that is the root of the systemic issues. That's where that privilege comes in, because the person who is deemed as better, whether that is white versus people of color, whether that is straight versus LGBTQ population, whether that is cisgender versus transgender,
Yep.
all of these systems that deem one person, one type of person better than the other, are rooted in those kind of privileges. And that's what we need to dismantle as the collective.
You're killing me here. The polarized divide is that.
Right.
The conservatives saying we're better than you, and the liberals saying we're better than you, but both of them saying you guys think you're better than us.
Right. It's like going back to the tail.
Yeah. Oy.
So one question, there are two questions that I have for you before we conclude. One is nagging at me, so I'm going to ask that at the end. Okay. But while we are at it, what is the role of an individual in this questioning of the collective shadow?
What a good question. Well, let me start by saying that at the individual level, if we don't look at our shadow, if we don't look at what we are afraid to look at, then we are driven by that which is in our unconscious. We're not actually making choices from a freedom place. We're making choices that we've already made before our conscious awareness can even decide which way to choose. We're being driven by our wounds, by the things we haven't looked at, by the unresolved conflicts, by the intergenerational traumas that we're still carrying. And the person who has not explored their shadow, Jung said it like this: if you haven't, I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember what Jung said, but it's like if you the person who doesn't explore their shadow will project that stuff out there and call it fate. So if the collective consciousness is just made up of individuals, then the same thing would be true of the United States as a collective. That because we don't look at our disowned spaces, how we choose is being driven by these unconscious traumas and wounds and the need to keep the old guard in place and the patriarchy on top. So we wind up getting into political choices and moves and maneuvers that are not coming from awareness, but from hidden agendas, hidden wounds, and unprocessed difficulty. Back to the idea of how I align myself with teaching individuals to explore their own hidden stuff. If the collective is made up of individuals and more of those individuals are comfortable looking at the scary and the difficult and the underbelly stuff, then the collective will be also.
Right. And that also, sometimes a lot of Bridgewalkers, they don't accept their spirituality because they think spirituality means bypassing this human experience and bypassing the shadow. But it's not exactly that.
No, in fact, you just described the shadow of spiritual exploration, which is to bypass and say, well, everything is love and light. Because that ain't true. Not everything is love and light. Love and light is what will come in to fill the spaces that are cleared out. When you process the shadow and the hidden, the love and light doesn't need any help. So if you're running around going, oh, love and light, love and light, love and light, you're doing the wrong thing. You should be running around going, let me explore the shadow, let me explore the shadow, let me explore the shadow. And as you do, the love and the light follows.
That is so beautiful. And in the ancient Indian wisdom of 7 chakra, that is shown as Anahat chakra. Anahat means unwounded. That's what we call here heart chakra. So Anahat, the other side of it is Ahat, which is wounded. And what that chakra's wisdom tells us is when you look at your wounds, you actually recognize that you are much bigger than the wounds. You are who you are actually is the unhurt self. So the path to getting to the unhurt self is to heal the wounds.
That's right. That's gorgeous. That actually aligns with something that I say in my teaching when talking about wounds is I remind people that they are bigger than the wounds. The wounds exist inside of their consciousness. But if you don't do your shadow work, when those wounded feelings come up, they overwhelm you, and then you do become the wound. Because there's not enough spaciousness in your consciousness to contain the wound. And the United States is very much in that place right now.
Right.
We aren't big enough in our consciousness to contain this wound of polarization. So we are the wound of polarization.
But the potential is that unwounded part, which is the Cancerian.
That's right.
Nurturing energy of welcoming everybody. So the last question,
the nagging one,
and this could just be how we are phrasing it. Every time we say that is the birth time of the United States, there's something within me that just questions it, because United States existed even before the Declaration of Independence happened. So what we are talking about really is the consciousness of United States as it is defined by, at that time, white men, right? That's what we are talking about, right? When we are talking about this Pluto and 4th of July in 1776 as the birth time, we are talking about just that consciousness that was created by colonizers.
Oh my God, you're killing me. So one of the things that there's a Ken Burns documentary about New York City. It's long. It's like 8-9 episodes, 2 hours each. That's Ken Burns, which means it feels like 20 hours. You know, his work. He's a beautiful documentarian, but he's got a slow rhythm. I have watched the first episode of that documentary personally about 20 times because I am obsessed with New York as the beginning of the consciousness that became the United States, but not for like 150 years. The Dutch settlement of New Amsterdam is really the first moment that the Europeans came in and established what would later become New York. And they came here to make money. New York is the center not only of the world, but of the cultural and financial center of the United States. And one of the things that happened in the 1776 to 1787 period in the United States was that's when the divide started rising up, where there was an awareness that the United States should and would in fact become manufacturing industrial country driven by capitalism. But now there's this agrarian divide that says, wait, we're farmers. We're going to be like the European aristocracy. And we're like, you know, these white folks, rich, making cotton and, you know, which needed slavery to exist, right? And then there was that decision to divide it was like a deal that said, all right, we'll give you what you want, you guys who think, you know, it's a manufacturing country, if we can move the capital to Washington, D.C., which was a nod to the notion that we were going to be an agrarian farming nation. And that became the South and slavery and that old guard. So there really is this way that the United States consciousness began a century and a half before that colonizing patriarchal, we're going to take this thing that is anybody's grab. We've already killed off the indigenous, so we're good there. Women don't count, so we're good there. And like slavery was still just like the way and the lay of the land. So yeah, you're absolutely right that, and I can speak to this through the idea that here we are
Mhm.
at the Pluto return in so much trouble,
Mhm.
not because July 4th began the United States, because you're right, it really didn't.
Mm.
July 4th, 1776 began the white, rich, patriarchal ownership
Mhm.
of the United States that took everything that was shadowy and said, we're going to pretend that's not true.
Mhm. Yeah.
Now, as an astrologer, I still have to use a chart.
Right. And that consciousness, if we want to understand that consciousness and analyze that, then this is the birth time we got
That's
to
right.
use
That's
for
right.
that consciousness.
For that
because
consciousness.
At this point, that is the consciousness that is running the show.
Right.
So we
And
have
if
to
you
look
think
at it.
about what was happening from
Right.
the 1600s through the late 1700s, is that
Mhm.
everybody who did come here was just sort of coming to find their way in a
Mhm.
new land. It
Mhm.
was in July 4th, 1776, that the white patriarchy sort of grabbed it and said, this is what it is.
This is right. This is such a beautiful conversation.
Oh,
I
yay.
absolutely loved it. And I would love for you to leave our listeners with whatever parting words,
Whatever. No,
whatever parting
no
words
pressure.
around whatever comes to you.
Well, the first thing I would like to say is that what I trust implicitly, because of how I feel about you, right?
Mhm.
And how I know of you, that your ministry, your audience,
Mhm.
the people who are listening, because they come through your consciousness, that this is how we do it. Like, we're already doing it. Like, we're in a bubble. We're only talking to people who agree with us. Right? But this is where it starts. It starts in these little bubbles. You know, one of the things that I have imagined about Pluto continuing to finish up in Capricorn over the next few years, and then moving into Aquarius for 2 decades, which starts in 2025. All sorts of peace movements are rising up right now.
Mhm.
Many. In fact, I would say the Pluto return is what is the reflection of all of the stuff that rose up in 2020
Mhm.
and 2021. So if the aspirational side of the Pluto return in Capricorn is the emergence of these new structures of advocation, healing, changing things, ending the divide, that what can start to happen in Aquarius, Pluto moving into Aquarius, which is the archetype that invented one harmonious world order that cares for all humans as a collective community, which is what we're to be doing for the next 2,000 years in the age of Aquarius. For those of us who are alive at this time, the 20 years of Pluto moving through Aquarius, I think, can show a coalescing of separate peace movements into a greater commonly based focus of working together more to solve some of these problems. And so I am optimistic about what's possible for the next 20 years as people who are activated by what's happening rise up and find their voices, you know?
Yes. That's a beautiful picture. That's the hope that drives me, my business, my expression, and a lot of Bridgewalkers. That's what we are counting on, that as each one of us heals, we will contribute to making this world a better place. So
Yay. Love it.
love it. Thank you, Dr. Michael, for being here and guiding our Bridgewalkers on and inspiring them to heal and contribute their unique expression to the collective ascension. Thank you.
My pleasure. What a joy.
Wasn't that a treat? What stood out to me in that prayer was how he ended that prayer with, we are all one. And that really is what we are learning here as human beings. We are all one. And in order to express that truth, the spiritual truth, through a lived human experience, there are people like you, Bridgewalkers, who have taken birth at this time on the earth in order to question, use your analytical side to question what is working, what isn't working, why is it not working, and how can I make that social system a better place. So your questioning of different systems, whichever systems you are interacting with, that is not a coincidence. Your irritation or anger or frustration or annoyance around those systems is not a coincidence. It is telling you, it is guiding you to recognize what needs to be changed and what you can do individually to contribute to that collective change. You are questioning the shadows of the collective, and the shadows of the collectives are reflected in the social systems and structures. One thing I also want to point out here is, yes, we talked about Pluto return of the United States, that very specific consciousness that was created in 1776 July. We talked about just specifically that. However, given the dynamic of the world from 2020, from the pandemic, if there was one thing we have learned, is that we are all one. What happens in one area of the world is going to have its impact on the other parts of the world. Whatever United States is facing also has its ripple effects that are going in other countries. So polarization isn't just happening in the United States. We are seeing in many countries, fundamentalist religious governments are coming in power. And those governments, they are rooted in this principle of supremacy of some people. So if you live in another country and not in the United States, look into what is going on in that country. Which shadows are you collectively exploring in that country? And if you're wondering, how is it that I personally contribute to changing these social systems and structures? Remember the message that Dr. Michael brought to us. Through our wounded spaces, when we look at our own individual wounds, our own individual shadows, then healing occurs and it opens up the space where love and light automatically comes in. I loved what he said about love and light doesn't need any help. It's going to do its thing. Our job is to heal our wounds. This is also in alignment with the guidance of Vishuddha Chakra. Vishuddha Chakra, you have heard of this as throat, and Vishuddha means especially pure. As we start aligning with who we are through healing, we uncover those unwounded parts of us that actually define us. And those are the parts then that we express. We do not express our wounds. We start expressing our healed, integrated parts of us. And that expression is what is going to contribute to you contributing in your own way to making these social systems and structures better. And we are in the age of Aquarius, like Dr. Michael Lennox said, from 2025, Pluto is going to be in Aquarius, thinking about community and wondering, what is it that I can bring to this community so that it becomes even stronger? And how can I contribute to building a community that supports an individual's divine expression? These are Aquarian energies. And when Pluto goes in that Aquarian energy, in Aquarius, what it is reflecting is people like you who have been healing, who are on the path of healing, who want to give to others the healing transformation, who want to build new social systems and structures, who care about that. Those people will be supported through the universal energy. So if this is the path for you, we have hope. I really have nothing but hope at this point, even when there is so much chaos and every day it feels like something else is going down. I do have hope from people who are listening to this podcast, Bridgewalkers, who healers, Wayshowers. I have hope that you will bring out your unique expression. And whatever is needed for you to do that, I help my clients do that. I have dedicated my whole business to help people heal in a way that they bring out their unique expression. Sometimes it is through business, but sometimes it could be through your family, right? Whatever path you choose, that healing to bring out your unique contribution to make this world a better place. So check out my offerings for service on how I work with people to do that. And then, of course, anytime you need assistance on healing your wounds, healing your trauma, and through the astrological lens, through the lens of dream interpretation, please, please, please check out Dr. Michael Lennox's services. He does individual sessions. He also offers classes, workshops, and those workshops are just beautiful. He channels his wisdom there, and there is just so much wisdom flowing through in those workshops. So please check it out. And follow him on social media. So you can, if you want to work with him, go to drmichaellennox.com, but follow him on social media. He has a podcast, look for Conscious Embodiment with Dr. Michael Lennox. And this podcast, he gives the astrological weather for the week, how you may experience that in our human experience. And then he also takes questions from listeners around dream interpretations and helps them interpret their dreams. Check that out. It is my go-to podcast to listen to. Every Monday, a new episode comes out. So check it out. Thank you for choosing the path of healing. Thank you for caring about questioning your privileges. Thank you for showing up to heal the wounds that come to you through your marginalized identity. And thank you for showing up to accept your dharma, meaning your unique way of being as a Bridgewalker. I'm grateful to have you in my audience, and I'm grateful to serve you in the way that I can. Namaste.